Welcome back. Thank you guys so much for coming back to class. Right now we're going to start by creating some animals and then placing them along our path. If you remember under the paint tool, you have different options, like solid is going to be a matte finish, and if you go with a metal, it's going to have a much shinier finish, or plastic will also be relatively shiny. So there might be things on your creature that you'd like to have shiny, like the eyeballs might look nice with a little, like if they're plastic, they might look a little more wet. So kind of an interesting thing to note is if you grab glow and you make an object glow, you can then make that object invisible and then it'll continue to put off light. So then if I go to the properties panel of the light, you can turn visibility off and it'll still put off light. Quick trick with your build like object menu, if you click on the button that brings it up and then you hold down, you can move it around and then place it where you'd like it. We're all going to continue working on our animals here in a minute, but before we do, I'd like everybody to pull out a shape of their choice. So I'm going to pull out a cube. Go ahead into the properties menu, click animated, hit record, and then move your object wherever you'd like it to move.
Cool.
And then hit stop recording, then hit play, and now you have an object that's animated.
Cool.
Loop, and you can either do continuously where it picks up at the very beginning or back and forth. So you could have like a dog coming in and out of your dog house, right? So it could go like run out and then come run back in. I'd like to go through some more script basics. So if you guys want to open up your build menu, go into gizmos and grab the script block out. Last time we built a respawn script, but we didn't talk too much about what is this? Like, what are we looking at? Look to the right side. What we're looking at here on this flag tab, this is our events tab. This defines when something is going to happen. So do we want to have something happen when the world is started? When a trigger is entered by a player or an object? Do we want to have something happen when the player enters the world or exits the world? So this first events tab is basically just defining when is something going to happen. Go to the next tab, which is the motion tab. And under motion, this is how you can create object motion. Right now, you've learned how to basic animate. Basic animation is great, and I highly recommend it for simple things like animals moving around. But if you want to create an animated object that causes other things to happen, you might consider using this type of motion. You could have a door open on an axis, which would look a lot smoother if you use a scripted door rather than a hand animated door. And if you scroll down once, you're going to see that you can also do player motion. Remember last time we used the respawn player. We're going to go to the third tab now, which is our actions tab. Actions are going to allow you to take, say Verka has the water coming out of the top of her respawn point. You could have it so it only splashes water as someone approaches by using the same trigger we created last time, but instead of having it respawn the player, we grab, if you scroll down once, you're going to see play visual effects. Now when the player enters a trigger, the effects go off. This is also where you can play sounds. You can use that animation you just created on your pet and have it only play the animation when someone gets too close to the doghouse. And so we're going to go to our next tab, which is our operations tab. Operations, in short, is just math. This is where you're going to find how to use your if statements, how to create calculations for object position. If you scroll down about 4 or 5 times, you're going to see position of object. You're going to find a lot of use in here. Say you wanted to know where the player is. If you scroll down 2 more times, you're going to see position of player. And now what you could do is you could say, when the player gets too close to doghouse, move dog to player's position. So now the dog runs forward at the player, and then after a certain period of time, retreats back into the doghouse. There's a lot you can do with this. It's really powerful.
Cool.
It's also, it takes a little bit of learning. It's a pretty steep learning curve. So we'll take our time as we get into this. All right, so we're going to go to our next tab, which is the values tab. Our values tab is basically just for getting, if you need a number somewhere in your script, you can grab a number or a Boolean. A Boolean is basically a true or false statement. Is it on, is it off? It's any yes or no. And then we also have setting values. So you could have a variable and you could set it using these values tab. We're going to go to our last tab, which is the variables tab. And just for kicks, click the plus new variable. And once you've pressed that, press the drop down and you're going to see we have numbers, booleans, objects, players, vectors, rotations, color, and string. The number variable is just a plain old number. So that's what the number is. The boolean is that on and off I was telling you about. So you could create a variable that's a boolean to track whether or not the dog was inside of the doghouse, if we're continuing with that example. The next one is an object. An object is anything, like anything that you want to tie into the script, whether that be a visual effects, a sound effect, the cat or dog, a rose, an orange, any object at all. The respawn point counts as an object, the trigger counts as an object. Those are all objects. So anything that you want to tie into your script is an object. The player ID represents a player. So when a player enters the world, you could capture their player ID and track some statistics, like how many times did they approach the doghouse. And then if they go too many times, it like plays a sound where you're like yelling at them, "Get off my lawn," or something, right? So there's a lot of cool ways to use player ID, but that just tracks individual players. The vector is 3 points. So a vector is, in the case of what we're using here, it's a world position. So there's X, Y, and Z. And so a vector represents a position in the world, but you can also use a vector to represent how far do you want something to move. So you could use it to say, I want the dog to move so far out of the doghouse. So you'd say, move to this position plus this. So that's how you can use a vector. A rotation is very similar to a vector. It's also 3 points. It represents a rotation, so like 90 degrees rotation. So that would be, a full rotation would be 360. Let's go ahead and click on color, but before we click on color, I want to talk about string. String is any string of text. So say, Agril, you wanted to create a book that had text appear. Well, you could have the text change based on where the player is or how far they've walked through your forest. And so the text would be a string that you would write here in as a variable, and you could have multiple strings that would then change as the player walked. So that's what a string is. So it represents text. So let's go ahead and click on the color. And if you click on color, go ahead and name it, I'm going to name mine red. You can name it a different color, but what you're going to be presented with is 3 zeros. Now these zeros are RGB, that's red, green, and blue. So if you went on a computer, you could search up RGB scale, and any color that you can create on an RGB scale, you're going to be able to create here. So if you type in 1 for the first value, that represents red. And what you'll see is you'll actually see the color appear underneath it. And then if you do another 1, that's going to create yellow. And if you go all the way to 1 on all 3, that creates white. And so you could use this to dynamically change the color of an object via script. If we pull out just a regular shape and we go to the Attributes tab, you'll notice at the top it says color. And so here we can change this color to be any RGB color. And so here I've now created a color that doesn't exist inside of our normal color palettes. And so you can create any color. Grab a trigger. We're then also going to grab a script, and then we're going to grab a sound recorder. Is go ahead and record a quick segment. So if we go into our sound recorder, and the first thing you need to know about the sound recorder is it only works if your audio is not muted. So if your audio is muted, it will not record anything. And you'll get like, it'll say failed. So I'm going to go ahead and just record. Woof, woof, woof. Okay, there we go. Maybe higher pitched, like a squeaky dog. Let's try that. Okay, that'll do. And now I don't want this to be global, but if I scroll down on the scroll bar on the right, I can change the distance to be like 10. So it's only hearable if you're near the dog. But I don't want this to loop. I only want this to play when the player walks near my dog on my forest journey. So I'm going to go ahead and turn looping off, play on start off, and global off. And once you open up your script panel, we don't need when world is started. What we need is when trigger is entered by player, so the same one we used last time. And then we need to grab from our actions tab, we're going to scroll down and grab play sound. And the sound we're going to play is going to be a new variable, which will be an object variable labeled woof. Now you both have cats, so if you want to label it meow, that's probably a fair option. So I'm going to grab the woof over. And so now I have created everything I need to play this sound. You go to your trigger. So if you open up your trigger properties and then hit Lake's Doggy Woof, or whatever you name your script, drag the doohickey on the left and connect it to your sound that you recorded, and then grab both of your trigger and your sound and go put it near your dog or your animal, and then when the player walks through the trigger, they will hear this sound. And so I'm going to go ahead and test mine out. It's pretty cute. It works. I'm going to move my trigger to be a little bit more where I'd like it to be. What you could do is you could put the trigger right on top of the cat's head. So if they pet the cat, then it meows, but it doesn't do it unless they pet the cat. So that would be a good time to make it small. Now you need to move the sound onto the cat too. So now it'll sound like it's coming from the cat. And now that you've learned how to make a meow sound effect, you can do the exact same thing for any of the visual effects we were messing with last week. Confetti burst, you could do the exact same thing, but instead of grabbing the play sound, you grab play visual effects. And so when the trigger's entered by a player, you play visual effects. All right, Kale, let's go take a look at your kitty cat. Very cute. Very cute. Does it only move when you walk through the trigger? Very nice, good job. I have to come and inspect your script. I'm so impressed. So I see how you've done this, but you don't need to have this play visual effects happen on trigger enter with player. You can just drag it up and be in the exact same event block. Good job. And now what I'd recommend you do is grab when trigger is exited by player, it's right underneath. And when you play that, make it stop showing the visual effects. Wonderful. So now, theoretically, your cat's only going to move when the player is coming through. You use stop animation, right?
No, stop visual effects.
It's weird that you're using visual effects and it's working. You definitely should be using play animation. Let's try this one and see if it works better. See, it still works. And now it like continues moving even when you're gone. And then when you walk away, it goes back to original position. It's really nice. Great job, Kale. This is really cool. Thank you so much for joining us in class today. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye!